But that wasn't even like the missionary position. That looked like grappling. That looked like some jujitsu. It looked like he almost was trying to get her to submit.
That's why they had the sexy sax music. It was to let you know that it was intimate, but also violent.
Remember when we first met John McClane? Argyle picked him up from the plane and took him down the Nakatomi Tower at the Christmas party. And the terrorists were overzealous, but it was sweet when they killed Ellis. And with a little help from Alan, John McClane kicked.
Welcome back to Shat the Movies, the podcast where we ask, were the movies we loved when we were growing up really that good? Have you caught yourself thinking, why don't they make movies like they used to? Can you still remember spending your Friday night searching for the perfect movie rental at Blockbuster Video? Do you know what Blockbuster Video is? If you answered yes, then this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host, Big D, Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And guest host extraordinaire, Kerri Gross.
Hello.
And tonight we're going to look back in time and decide if our favorite films still hold up. Each week, the audience selects from 6 movie choices that we break out in the race car VHS tape rewinder and watch the movie that tallied the highest number of votes. At the end of the podcast, Big D, Kerri, and I will provide the audience with the number of wipes each movie would take to get off their respective bums. So find a comfortable spot on the sofa and accompany us for a journey through our vast VHS movie collections. You can download Shat the Movies via iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are found. And if you're wondering where Raj is, Big D's going to tell you.
I don't know where he is. He's been traveling quite a bit. He could be in Toronto. He could be in New York. He could be in Seattle. He's somewhere.
Raj, for the first time since I've known him, is really in love with his new job, and he's working his ass off and traveling a lot. So we do miss him, but he will be back next week, I believe, for our next podcast, which will be revealed at the end of this one. So Raj, we miss you. Can't wait to have you back. Big D, what do we have this week?
So there are some cornerstones of the 1980s and 90s that you always have to hit. You know, Schwarzenegger, Stallone. And this is a big one here. I can't believe we haven't touched on it until now, but it was the best of Jean Claude Van Damme. In last place was Kickboxer from 1989. Third place, Double Impact from 1991. And both of those got like 12%. So now we got to the final 2, and it was tight. It was a difference of 9 votes. And you consider we had 1,000 votes on this category again. Third place, Bloodsport from 1988, and that leaves only one Jean-Claude movie. Timecop 1994 was the winner with 39%.
So I know that Timecop is widely recognized as Van Damme's one of his better films and kind of a higher production value. It came a little bit later in his career. But for me, Bloodsport, I mean, again, who am I to defy the will of the voter? But Bloodsport is such a classic and a movie that I love. So I was really heartbroken, but I tried to keep an open mind when it came to Timecop. Again,
people got on me because I said I could confuse Casino and Goodfellas. But Bloodsport, is that the one with Natsu Cow, and like the bandana, or was that Kickboxer?
So Bloodsport was the one where they go to the Kumite, which is like the full contact tournament, and he had to face Chun-Li.
Yeah.
That's the one where he was Frank Dukes, put up your dukes.
And he fights he looks like a truck driver, like a hillbilly with a bandana.
Yeah, but they end up becoming friends.
Yeah. And does he paralyze him?
He gets paralyzed. Chun-Li paralyzes him, I believe.
Okay, so I have seen it, you see? But still, Timecop was the way to go. I mean, I remember it. People on Twitter seem to be a big fan of it. And because it was so close, I mean, maybe we'll put the category back up again because there are some other good Jean-Claude movies. And then we could eventually get back to Bloodsport. But this makes me think, if we're going to do these 90s pseudo tough guys, I got to put Seagal up there, a Seagal category.
I was talking with some of my coworkers. There's a group of them. Shout out to John and Z and Joseph. And they were talking about, they're like, why haven't you done Seagal? And they just started rattling off all the ridiculous. And there's actually a movie where his character is named Gino Felino. And I'm like, how the fuck did any of this get made? But yeah, we would be remiss if we didn't include him in all of this.
Yeah, so I've been catching up with the backlog of categories, so I'll be sure to add that one this week.
So for those who aren't familiar with Timecop, it's a 1994 American science fiction action film based on Timecop, which is a story that appeared in Dark Horse Comics anthology. The film stars Jean Claude Van Damme as a police officer named Max Walker in a world where time travel has been made possible. It also stars Ron Silver as a rogue politician and Sara as Melissa Walker, Jean Claude Van Damme's wife. It is Van Damme's highest grossing film, so this is really the peak of his career. And although it was met with mixed reviews, again, like I said, this is considered one of his better ones. And if you look at it from a perspective of spend and effects, they really went all out with this one. Like, it's not, they didn't go on the cheap on this. Like, Bloodsport was more of a budget movie. But I don't know if that works. Like, maybe he's not the guy to spend on it. Does that make sense?
It's going to come out in the end, but I think he shows in here some range, and that he is more than just a roundhouse kick to the face and a killer ass in quads. You know, he's more than that.
So I wonder if you and I might be biased, Big D, because we both, saw this. I was a big fan of Bloodsport as a kid. And I think like I watched this at like slumber parties and stuff like that as a teenager. So I grew up with Van Damme as a part of my, movie diet. And how were you affected? Like, what part of your life did Van Damme come into?
I can vividly remember this movie. I was in college, and it was the first date that I went on with what would turn out to be my college girlfriend I think we probably dated 6 years. So we went out to dinner first. It wasn't Chili's, but it was a nice little restaurant near the movie theater. Then we went, saw Timecop. And I don't think at the time I enjoyed it as much, because when you're on a first date, it's awkward. You're trying to feel each other out. You don't, where do you put your hand? You slide on their leg. So it was a good experience, but I wasn't focusing totally on the movie. And I should have been, because I love time travel movies. I talked about in the past how I think my favorite time travel movie when I was a kid was Time Rider, The Adventures of Lynn Swan. He's riding the dirt bike through the desert. But there's Philadelphia Experiment, Final Countdown, My Science Project. I was a big time travel fan, so this movie was right up there. And I had great memories of it, and right now I'm kind of mixed.
How about you, Kerri Gross?
I would say Jean Claude Van Damme isn't in my repertoire of movies that I give a shit about. But when I was reading this, when it was chosen, I saw a lot of comparisons to Blade Runner, which I know you guys are already rolling your eyes at me, is one of my favorite movies. So I thought I have to watch this because everybody compares it to Blade Runner, thinks it's better than Blade Runner, and time traveling is cool. So I watched it for the first time this weekend while I had patients that were asleep and being discharged. So in the basement of the hospital, trying not to fall asleep watching this.
So who are these people comparing this to Blade Runner?
Well, just by a Google search, there are articles if you type in Blade Runner versus Timecop. And I'll get to my comparisons here in a little bit, but don't even get me started.
So if you haven't seen Timecop, you don't really need to. But if you have 90 minutes and you want to watch it, pause it, go watch it, come back. If you don't want to do that, Big D posted a great graphic on our Twitter feed for Shut the Movies, and you can basically get the entire story right there. So you can look at that while you're listening to all this, and it'll sort of make sense. But listen, this movie is a convoluted mess. We're going to get into it. So Big D, if you don't have anything else, let's roll that trailer.
How you doing, partner? Ex-partner. Let me go, Max. I'm not hurting anybody.
Got to take you back.
In the year 2004, time travel is a reality.
You are charged with violations of TEC Code 40.8, time travel with intent to alter the future.
And a crime.
It turns out going back in time is a pretty easy way to make money.
I think you got yourself a shipment of gold and you're taking to General Lee.
The genie is already out of the bottle. The technology is there.
Now, one man
You ever hear the name Aaron McComb?
is about to take the ultimate power trip.
He's gonna be president.
You don't need the press, you don't need endorsements, you don't even need the truth. You need money.
But to enforce the laws of time,
Are we still together in 10 years? Am I dead?
one man is determined to stop him.
I cannot go back to save her. This scumbag is not going back to steal money.
Stay here, Walker. My future, you're dead.
I think you planned too far ahead.
Jean Claude Van Damme, Ron Silver,
Will you get him?
Sara,
By the year 1994, time travel has been developed and is used for illicit purposes. The Time Enforcement Commission has been established to police the use of time travel, with Senator Aaron McComb overseeing operations and financing. While at home with his wife, Melissa, police officer Max Walker is attacked by unknown assailants and witnesses the house explode, killing her. So before that even happens, we have a great scene with a guy standing in the roadway. You're like, what's going on? We're in, I think, Confederate Georgia. It's in, the 1800s. And there's a Confederate convoy, and the guy stops it with automatic weapons. There's this tense standoff. He ends up, demanding their gold, and then he pulls out, these futuristic guns, and you're like, oh, okay, something cool is happening. And I'm like, this could be a good movie. And so I didn't want to make the same mistake I made during Conan, where I was like, oh, this movie's going to be dumb, and then it turned out to be amazing. And so I started giving this movie the benefit of the doubt. Where were you guys on the beginning of this? Like, did it grip you, or did you just not give a shit?
I think that first scene in, what is it? Is it Gainesville, Georgia? It was Gainesville, Georgia. I love scenes like this where you try to figure out what would I do in the past, what could happen. But some things just got my brain thinking. And again, it's a problem. Whenever you go into a time travel movie, everyone turns into fucking Stephen Hawkins. Everybody becomes an expert in quantum physics, and everyone will start to tell you what's wrong with it. So I don't want to be that guy, but why is this dude missing his front tooth? Was that part of playing the role to go back in time to rob this caravan?
So, this is the only guy in the movie who gets it right. He's like, I'm going to try to look like I'm from this period. Every other person time traveling is like, I'm going to wear my future clothes. And they don't seem to care. This is the only guy where, and again, this is where I thought, okay, the movie's got it right, where he's hiding the weapons that he's using. And he's trying to blend in with the people around him. And I wanted to see more of that guy, quite frankly. What the fuck happened to him?
I don't know. I don't know, but it opens questions, and the movie does not do a good job of describing the mechanics of how time travel works. They give us the 3 rules, but there's got to be fucking easier ways than going back to the 1800s to steal a wagon full of gold. How is he going to get the gold back to modern day? Does he do that? Does he bury the gold and hide it, go back to 1994, then go dig it up?
You've already given more thought to this movie than the writers did. That's actually a brilliant way to do it. What you should have written this movie, Big T.
Yeah, and then the other question I have is, when you go into the machine and you go back in time, it seems like they can deliver you back in time at a specific location. So if that's the case, wouldn't German terrorists have a more efficient way to maybe steal some gold in Germany from Hitler, hide it? Why come all the way back? It didn't seem like they were really planning that far ahead. So I was a bit confused.
Wouldn't there be money to steal that he could have just stolen from 5 years past that would actually be the current currency that we use? Why is he going 100 years back to steal gold? He could have just gone 1 year. This doesn't make any sense to me.
And I'm sure I'm going to get some shit from the scientists out there, but the first thing they say is they're like, well, how do we know where this gold came from? And they're like, oh, well, it's carbon dated. And you can't carbon date gold. So gold, if you didn't know this, it's its own element. It doesn't have any useful isotopes for dating. And so even if you could carbon date gold, you can't get down to this precise year. They know what year it was stolen from. So they're playing fast and loose with the science here, which again, you don't have to. And I think it's going to be the theme for this movie is that they made decisions that they didn't have to make. So then they have to explain those decisions when you could have just left it out completely.
Imagine you're a fucking Middle Eastern terrorist and you're going to go, to a deal for nuclear weapons, and some fucking clown shows up with a wagon full of gold. You're going to be like, what the fuck? What am I going to do with a wagon full of gold? I can't transfer this. That's obviously how they got caught. You hear the wagon and the horse pulling up the road. They must have been like, what is going on?
And the ridiculousness doesn't stop at the time travel. So, I mean, we will come back to that over and over again because you can't watch this movie and not talk about the time travel issues. But there are other problems with this movie. And one of the big things that bother me is this is a 90s thing with these action movies, is the wardrobe.
Yeah, it seems like in the 90s when they were going to do any kind of futuristic villain, the only thing they would manipulate is the hair. You'd give them some kind of leather and a spiky hair, maybe shave the sides. That's what they do with these clowns. But when I'm sitting there and I'm watching this mall in 1994, it struck me, forget about the technology. When's the last time you actually went to a mall to go shopping? I can't remember, other than to maybe go to the Apple store. When's the last time you went shopping?
They actually just closed down Jean and I's childhood mall that's just right down the street from here. It's now completely vacant. So they are totally non-existent. But I mean, there's probably still a hot topic there in 2004.
Yeah, I'm pretty convinced that Christmas is the only thing that's actually keeping malls open. Plus, I do think that there's certain like stores that are mall specific, but the mall of today is not the mall of the 90s. The mall of the 90s had the photographer with a parrot on his shoulder and like the fountain and like food carts and all that shit. And now it's strictly a shopping place.
I think that mall scene is like the first scene with Jean Claude Van Damme, and he high kicks that punk on the skateboard in the face, and it just begins the perpetual one-liners. Like he kicks him in the face and he's like, you know, that purse does not look good on you. And then from that moment on, I feel like every 4 minutes is just one-liner after one-liner after one-liner. So
that's not a problem that I have. I think he does it with enough tongue in cheek. He's looking at us and he's kind of winking at the audience. He's having fun with it as well. But the one thing that does bother me about Jean-Claude, it is clear that he thinks he is a world-class lover. You could feel him trying to tell the director, listen, I want you to shoot me this way. I want you to... Every scene is him like caressing his wife, and he does like a full open mouth kiss. He's talking dirty to her in the mall. He's always talking about how to please a woman. Jean-Claude definitely thinks he's the Casanova.
One important thing to note, though, is that when Jean Claude Van Damme makes a movie, that movie is intended for international release. And so he has a big following. And so what surprised me is as a kid, when my cousins would come over from Iran, they were obsessed with Jean Claude Van Damme. And this formed their ideas of sex, of machismo, of humor. So I think that he includes that in his film because he's supposed to be superhuman in every way. And to them, this was very, very believable stuff. So I think we're watching it from a very narrow viewpoint, one being, 2018, but also, being people who are Americans with American sensibility. This seems weird to us, but to them, they thought this was very erotic.
Very erotic. He's in the mall talking dirty to his wife. Boom, smash cut to nighttime. And I know we always see women on screen nude, but they do an uncomfortably slow crawl up Jean-Claude's quad. And granted, he's ripped, he's in good shape. You can see, I watched it in HD, you can see the hair on his ass cheeks. It comes up, focusing on every muscle group. They do a quick pan and we see Sara's boobs. And I'm thinking, fuck, Ferris is not going to be happy about this. But the main scene is covered and drowned out by this saxophone, like sexy, smooth jazz. And it's uncomfortably loud. But I was left from the scene thinking, Jean was in the fucking editing booth being like, no, do a slower pan up my ass, slower, pause. And it goes on about 15 seconds too long to where it's uncomfortable. Kerri, as a woman, did you like to see this man on display?
No. And I was just going to say, as a woman, if I'm just casually shopping in the mall, which I don't do, but if I were, and someone came up behind me very closely and was like, don't turn around, you're going to put my fucking elbow in your face before I turn around. Like, that's not sexy. And I feel like maybe some men in the 90s were inspired by this behavior of being like, women like it when we do this and we're mysterious and we sneak up on them in public places. Like, no.
Look, this poor guy is trying to take advantage of the one silver lining of having his accent, which is that his wife is going to know it's him behind her. And so, I feel like you got to cut him some slack here. I thought he looked great. You mentioned, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It was weird because when I saw that as a kid, I always was like, man, I wonder what she looks like naked. And then when it actually happened, I was like, I didn't want it to happen this way. Like, it's not the way I wanted to lose my Sara virginity.
But that wasn't even like the missionary position. That looked like they were like fucking grappling. That looked like some jujitsu. It looked like he almost was trying to get her to submit.
That's why they had the sexy sax music. It was to let you know that it was intimate, but also violent.
Exactly. But finally, after their lovemaking is done, he gets the call in the middle of the night. He's got to go running back to work. And he's a bit of a dick here. She's trying, obviously, to tell him something. Gives him multiple chances. And he's like, okay, just tell me. And she's like, all right, I'll tell you. Oh, can this wait? I'm like, you're not doing a good job here communicating with your spouse.
Does anyone else hate in these movies when characters are so demanding of their significant others to like not answer the phone? I mean, I know she was trying to tell him something important, but I feel like in every movie in the 90s, it's like, oh, I got to get that. Like, how many sex scenes have you seen where they're like, mid-coitus and their phone is ringing, they're like grabbing for it and they're answering the phone, like, oh, hello, it's work, I've got to go. Like, who does that?
Yeah, unless you're the Secret Service, they can fucking work without you. They're not going to need you.
I mean, I think in Top Gun, I think it was also justified.
So now we see he decides that he's got to go to work. He get jumped by what we find out later, the future assassins. We'd seen them briefly in the mall. They're coming back to kill Walker. He's a cop. You might be smart to think he could be wearing body armor. So why does every movie choose to shoot people directly in the chest? If you're going to kill somebody, wouldn't you shoot him in the head?
Well, not only that, but they're coming back in the future with those future guns. And they blow holes in walls. I mean, these are massive guns. And yet somehow this bulletproof vest at literally less than 2 feet away is somehow able to stop them. It doesn't make a ton of sense. But, again, if we're going to get that granular, we're going to be here all day. So much bigger glaring errors. This is just the beginning of a catastrophe of a movie.
So I think you're not taking into the account that, yes, a bulletproof vest will stop certain caliber weapons, but you put Jean Claude's chest, his abdomen behind it, it's almost like layering protection. It might have gone through the vest and his Belgian masculinity stopped it, but it doesn't work. They don't kill him. And then for some unknown reason, they just decide to blow the house up. Real subtle.
And that's revealed later. So 10 years later, Walker is a veteran of the TEC, again, the Time Enforcement Commission, and he's working under Commissioner Eugene Matuzak, who sends him back to October 1929 to prevent his former partner, Lyle Atwood, from using knowledge of the future to financially benefit from the U.S. stock market crash. When confronted, Atwood admits to being working for Senator McComb, who needs the funds for his upcoming presidential campaign. Fearing that McComb will erase him from history, Atwood attempts to jump to his death, but Walker catches him mid-leap and returns to 2004. Refusing to testify, Atwood is sentenced to execution and then is returned to 1929, where he resumes falling to his death.
Now, again, I love any time travel movie where we see the past and we can start to think, okay, how are these actions going to affect the future? So I like that. The whole scene there I'm really liking. And I can put out of my mind, how long has Atwater been in 1929, the fact that he's got an office, that everyone in the building knows him, that he seems to be employed, he must have been there quite a while.
Yeah, and Atwood is like the shittiest time traveler. Like we talked about the first guy who's robbing the Confederates in Georgia. He's dressed in the right way. Atwood puts on 1929 garb, but he brings so much evidence from the future into the past. So I started thinking about that. I'm like, what an idiot. But I was annoyed because the movie wasted considerable time making sure that we knew he was from the future coming to the past. Like all these artifacts were just meant to show us that he came from the future. So they slowly pan across the newspaper, longer than Jean Claude Van Damme's ass. Then they circles the stock name so he's investing in stocks. And I'm like, dude, wouldn't you just show up with a list on a smartphone and be like, all right, these are the stocks?
Fuck yes. You do your research online. You find out what stocks. You just plan them out. You go back for 2 minutes. You place the order and you jump back out. You don't set up shop. You don't fucking start to live there. But you hated the one-liners, Kerri. I think they're great. When he finally realizes that Walker's going to take him in, he pushes a little button under his desk and in comes like those two gangs of New York, like 1920s, barroom brawlers. I'm going to get you, gloves up. And the dude says something like, I once went 10 rounds with John L. Sullivan himself. And Van Damme kicks him in the face because this dude's never seen, a Belgian roundhouse. I watched the Tyson beat Spinks on TV. Again, you're a time cop. You're trying to limit the effects. You're a future man coming back, talking about TV, Mike Tyson. There's a risk you're going to change the future.
Yeah, I think, and the thing that Atwood and Walker have in common is that they both work for the TEC. And the TEC itself is like the sloppiest, this is the agency that is supposed to be in charge of regulating time travel. And they sentence an agent to death for attempting to alter the past. And then their form of execution is to send him back to the past to land in a fucking car from the sky. It's wildly irresponsible.
Well, how do they explain when he's falling from the sky with Jean Claude Van Damme behind him and then they just disappear into thin air? I know they don't want to change the past, but also how do you just fucking explain that they cut them right then and there back into current time?
That's what the good book is for. all things can be explained in the Lord.
Whatever. Also, I thought it would be an interesting theory that like you could only travel back in time and not into the future because the future hasn't happened yet. But then they don't explore that at all in this. And then they just keep changing shit in the past, which they said was like the rule that you couldn't do. So the good book explained this to me.
Well, I want to go back to something that Jean said. I like the swift justice. It reminded me, that courtroom right in TEC, of the old Eagles Veterans Stadium in Philly. You know, granted, they won the Super Bowl. What's up? You know, Coach Marcus, congratulations. But they used to have a courtroom right under the stadium. So when the Philly fans would get out of control and act belligerent, the police would grab them up, pull them right down below. They'd appear in front of the judge, drunk and belligerent as they were. Justice is great. You dispense it quickly. But Jean, you're right. You put him back there, he's going to fall to his death. It's going to raise questions. You're having a risk. They should have just taken him and shot him in one of the cells. Why risk putting him back?
Or they could have just gone back in time and never sent him back in time.
Yeah, that sounds great. But Atwood is not very good at keeping secrets. And I think this is kind of funny. When he's caught by Walker, he says, I can't go back. I can't go back. He'll kill my grandmother. He'll kill my cat, my family. I won't exist. But yet 2 seconds later, unsolicited, have you heard of Senator McComb? He's behind it all. Walker didn't even need to be a detective. Atwood just spilled the beans right away.
Well, that's just how intimidating Jean Claude Van Damme is. Like, he scares Atwood into telling him, and Atwood, you know, he's lost his wits completely, and he's just trying to get by, I think. But after Atwood's death, we get the first view of the future. By the way, you know it's the future because Jean Claude Van Damme's hair is now long. His hair actually looked kind of cute in 1994.
I liked it.
His 2004 hair is god awful, but
it's a mullet. But it's a fucking mullet.
It's our first look at 2004. What did you guys think of the depiction of the future? Now, again, now we know 2004 is the past, but at the time, they were trying to project forward and see what the future would look like. Were you impressed? Were you disappointed?
I am always perpetually disappointed about how rarely present day resembles the projected future. And unlike some of these sci-fi movies, like the car the senator's in is I think rad as fuck, you know. And then when you go into Jean Claude Van Damme's house, the apartment's really cool. And here we are past 2004. It's now 2018. And I'm just super disappointed that I'm still driving a Toyota Yaris that hasn't evolved much since my first car, which was 1986. I just now have an aux cord, but I still actually have to drive it myself.
Yeah, but what year is your Yaris?
It's a 2008.
Yeah, if you want me to make your car like Walker's, I'll take some lawn chairs, some fucking trash can lids. I'll bolt them to the side. That looked like that terrible car in Last Starfighter that they pull up in. That was terrible. That didn't look anything futuristic. The apartment, that maybe is the only comparison to Blade Runner. They tried to make it dark, a little smoky, the video screens. You know, they have voice recognition, but yet he's still watching a VCR tape of his wife building a birdhouse.
Well, the whole thing, that whole scene is when I started to see the comparison with Blade Runner, with Walker entering his house and pouring himself a drink. And I mean, it even looks like he might be pouring Johnny Walker, which is what Deckard drinks in Blade Runner. And then he's watching this home video of his wife, and again with the slow, sad, sexy sax music, which is just a total ripoff. So it was hard for me to separate it from comparing it to Blade Runner, to be honest.
And you know there's no way that Jean-Claude sleeps with shorts on. He is a naked sleeper.
Oh, he's for sure a naked sleeper.
With silk sheets.
Okay, so he wasn't sleeping on the silk sheets this night. He fell asleep on the couch. He's awoken. Okay, he's in a dead sleep. He hears the sound of that taser charging. Whoop, and he is fast enough to jump off the couch and beat the taser. That fucker's fast.
To be fair, it was a slow taser, though. Like in every shot that it's fired, you can actually visually track the taser bolt in the sky, like as it's flying. That was like it was like the yo-yo of tasers.
Was that knife fight the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen? They were trying to it was like they were fencing.
Every fight in this movie is the most ridiculous fight I've ever seen.
No, but it's okay. Listen, when he's kicking people in the face and they do the quick cuts, that's kind of funny. But that knife thing was ridiculous. It was like when you go to Benihana and the dude takes two of the knives or the knife and the sharpener, and he's like, that's what this scene was. I was waiting for them to make an onion volcano.
To clarify for people who haven't seen Timecop recently, there's a scene where Jean Claude Van Damme gets his hands on a knife. It is maybe a 4-inch blade, and the other guy is attacking him. The other guy is clearly a skilled knifesman, and Van Damme, instead of trying to evade the knives, is blocking them with a single blade, but he's holding it perfectly stationary. The other guy is actually contacting the blade for him. And again, I'm not a master martial artist or anything like that, but I've trained to disarm and to survive a knife attack. And you understand that you are going to get stabbed, you are going to get cut, and that it's just taking it in the right spot and being able to counter. But everything Van Damme does is wrong, except for he does the shirt trick, which is something that's effective. If you do have a piece of cloth, you can disarm. But yeah, the knife thing was just ridiculous. And I think that's the problem with this movie is we could forgive all the time travel shit if the combat was good.
I'll forgive the combat. That split on the countertop to evade the water and the electricity. I know every movie he looks for a situation to do a split. It's like Jackie Chan is always looking for a ladder to fall off of or some window to jump through. So I'll forgive it. This has to be his best split of his entire career.
I mean, he looks amazing in this, and I don't think anybody can disagree. Like, this is one of the most iconic shots, I think, of 90s action movies. It's unmistakable. You see that, you know exactly that it's Timecop, and I don't think you could say that about, maybe you could say about Bloodsport, but, we look at Lionheart or Kickboxer, it's easy to forget what those movies look like. It summarized the entire movie in one shot. So after Walker survives this attack, he's assigned a new partner, TEC rookie Sara Fielding. She's from Internal Affairs, and together they are sent back to 1994 to investigate McComb. They witness a meeting between young McComb and his business partner, Jack Parker, where McComb wishes to withdraw over a disagreement about a new computer chip. They're interrupted by an older McComb, who arrives from 2004 to stop the exchange, claiming the chip will become highly profitable. Older McComb specifically tells his younger self not to touch him, as the same matter cannot occupy the same space, and then he kills Parker. Fielding turns on Walker, revealing that she works for McComb, and after a shootout with McComb's henchmen, Fielding is wounded and Walker escapes back to 2004.
Jesus Christ, how many problems we have here. So now this is another example of time travel, and of course I have another problem. In the first scene that we see Walker go back in time, they're able to put him on like the penthouse floor of an office building perfectly, right? Somehow, when they send Walker and Fields back, they just dump them in the Potomac. And then later, we see them just dump Jean Claude in the middle of a highway in front of a truck. Is this operator error or is just the technology not refined?
Well, I'm confused that when they take off to go back into the past, they're in these like shuttles. But then once they've hit this vortex of like, I don't know, time, space, black hole, they're just dropped from the sky in their human being form. Where'd the fucking space shuttle go? And now they have like a remote that can just send them back into the present time. So why do they have to be sent off in a vehicle? And how can you not choose not to be in front of a fucking oncoming semi?
And I'm embarrassed because until you guys brought it up, I didn't even notice that part. So I'm like looking at all these little dumb things. I'm like, yeah, how the fuck did they get back in there? Why is there a wall at the end of this runway that you hit and die? Like, why wouldn't you have it? You could have it be circular. You could have it just be a really long track. So if you miss the jump, you're still alive. They're like, no. We're going to put a wall at the end that you smack into.
Or later in the film when Jean-Claude comes back by himself and he's like, oh, you just missed it. We were almost about to take these tracks off. And it's like, so had they he can shoot back by pushing a button, but if they had dismantled the tracks, he would have just turned into the melty blob? I don't understand.
I don't think they understood either. But why do they seem to go back in time after the person who is violating the time code goes back? They appear after them. If somebody's going back to change the future, wouldn't you want to go back maybe 5 days before and be sitting there waiting for them to appear and then just arrest them instead of showing up at the warehouse after they're already there?
And also, if you catch them in the act, I mean, again, it looks like this justice is pretty swift. Why not just carry out the execution right there? Maybe because nobody in this movie knows how to use a fucking gun.
Or like I'm going to say 1,000 times in the rest of this review, why don't they just go back in time and destroy the fucking guy that created time travel?
Because we wouldn't have this glorious masterpiece then to review. But yeah, guns would be great. Jean Claude obviously doesn't know how to shoot one. He's more proficient with a giant axe or a giant wrench or his feet. And he's not the brightest. When that guy is shooting at him and he gets onto the little, what do they call that thing? Where
it's like a forklift.
Yeah, when he gets onto the forklift, he's hiding behind two barrels that are labeled extremely flammable, extremely flammable. If someone's shooting at me with an automatic weapon from 15 feet away, this wouldn't be the best place to hide.
No, but a lot of the combat, again, it's repetitive. It's a little bit boring. Some of the effects look terrible. I was not impressed with this. This is really like the biggest singular fight scene. I mean, you've got the climax at the house, but I think that this is really where they spent their money as far as like a big, like duke it out, things exploding stuff. And I found myself really bored with it. Where, you mentioned before, Big D, a Jackie Chan movie, even or a Seagal movie, there's at least some slapstick, some inventiveness, something interesting to look at. I was it was a dull fight.
They're always looking for a reason for Jean Claude to become disarmed so he can just start kicking people. In other movies like Commando, no one ever reloads, no one ever runs out of ammo. In this movie, it seems like everybody runs out of ammo. Everybody looks at their gun, throws it on the ground, and then just starts fighting. It's ridiculous. But the one thing that they do as far as the time-space continuum that seems thought out and was kind of cool was when, of course, get ready, Walker decides to kick Senator McComb, young Senator McComb, in the face, and you see old McComb from the future, a scar appears. It seemed like maybe on set that day, they were like, hey, what if the young guy gets hurt and we can see it on the old version?
It seems like they actually might have had a conversation about time travel just in that one moment there to make it seem accurate and plausible. But that one thing, just the scar. Nothing else makes sense, but that, of course, he would develop a scar.
Kerri, you mentioned that you really like the cars and the apartment and all as depicted in this movie as opposed to what actually happened in 2004. I would really have loved to have the VR sex that they had in 2004 because I mentioned on last week's Westworld podcast that I recently gave up porn, and I found myself we've watched a ton of movies on this podcast where there was nudity, and it didn't do a thing for me. Suddenly, I'm watching this VR sex scene, and I'm like, Jesus, this is having an effect on me. I was squirming in my seat. I kind of it was a very brief VR, but I was like, man, that would be pretty nice.
Again, this is a reason why you should not watch some of these in HD. That naked girl, her teeth, I sent you guys screenshots today, was jacked up. In the theater, I might have been distracted, but here I was thinking, oh, get braces.
I love the text that you sent that were like, if virtual reality pornography was actually a thing, don't you think they would make like the perfect girl? And then you sent like a zoomed in close up of this haggard, and Jean's like, I thought she was hot.
Exactly. It's because he's all pent up.
Well, she's got red hair, she's got breasts, and she's doing some sort of a jerking motion with her hands. This is the 3 criteria, Big D.
Exactly. You've gone too far with your cold turkey. I'm starting to question whether you should just break this dry spell and just go take care of yourself.
Yahtzee.
So, you mentioned the virtual sex. Let's keep in mind that TEC is a secret government agency that is defending the history of the world. It's more important than nuclear weapons. But yet you got some clown who's dressed like he's a web developer sitting there with virtual goggles on, essentially jerking off at the desk. Does that fly in the future?
I think that they were just trying to do some comedic relief that wasn't Van Damme, and it seemed a little bit odd. They always do this though, 24 had it. I feel like this is just like the old shtick: is that anybody who's a real intense scientist or a really talented tech guy is going to be like a pervert and also really eccentric, and it's definitely not the case where I work.
But what about the fact that TEC has been up and running for 10 years now, right? This guy who's running the control booth, it's like it's the first time he's seen it. Did you see that? Yeah, what a ride. Dude, this is the 1,000th time you've done this. I don't think you'd be that excited.
Well, the physics of the whole thing are questionable, though. I mean, the science is intensely flawed, and they keep bringing up this idea, and he brings up the same matter can't occupy the same space at the same time. But this is the thing, in your body, most of those atoms in your body are regularly replaced. So 10 years later, you're basically a different person. I mean, your consciousness is there, but what made up your flesh and your bone and everything is completely different atoms. It's not the same matter.
Also, don't forget to check out Gene's new podcast called Shat the Facts, where he's just going to talk about factual things like gold can't be, whatever, and matter can't. Yeah, so Shat the Facts, Gene's new podcast.
Hey, kids, do you know about photosynthesis? I'm Gene Lyons. Okay, so let's get away from the science here. Walker goes back in time. Fields mentions, because she's reminiscing about where she was in 94, and she says, I should call 16-year-old myself and say not to sleep with Bobby Morgan at the party because it's disappointing. But it leads me to the question of, if you could go back in time 10 years and you had 2 minutes with yourself, what would you say?
Don't go to nursing school. Don't ever.
Really?
Don't ever become a nurse. You're just going to be fucking stressed out, wiping bloody buttholes all day. Go to like beauty school or something, or learn how to do Botox.
What?
Serious.
Shut the fuck
I get
up.
students that precept under me, and they're like, what advice would you give a new nurse? And I'm like, well, it's too late, but I would have told you not to go to nursing school.
Oh, Jesus. Gene?
I just tell myself not to leave Chicago. So I was working at the Sun-Times in 2007, and they went bankrupt. And then I was like, well, I can't be without a job. So I took another newspaper job, and I didn't realize that, like, now I have a better understanding of what unemployment is. I thought it was a really shameful thing. So I was like, well, I got to take the first job I get. So it was a newspaper job in Ohio. And I spent 5 years in Ohio that could have been spent in Chicago. Like, all my other friends who got booted out of the Sun-Times, they just found other jobs in the next couple months, But so that's what I would have done. I would tell myself, hey, listen, unemployment's fine. Take the unemployment and your severance and stay in Chicago and enjoy your life. Don't move to Ohio.
God, you two make me feel like a piece of shit. I was going to say, I'd go back to myself and say, buy Amazon stock. Don't buy food. Don't buy clothes. Work and buy Amazon stock. Amazon was like $88 back in January of 2008. It closed today at $1,350. You two are talking about life decisions, and I'm thinking about making some bank.
I was trying to be kind of lighthearted. I mean, I always mock my job. It's wonderful, but it's also the worst thing that's ever happened to me. But if I were on all seriousness, I would have maybe told young, dumb me not to get married to the guy that everybody was always telling me not to get married to.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
Well, I think all of us had better advice than McComb gave to himself, his past self.
Do you think you could do me a favor and lay off the fucking candy bars, would you? All right, that's all you had to say was lay off the fucking candy bars. Meanwhile, we're worried about the poor life decisions we made as far as careers and marriage and, stock investment, but lay off the Snickers, would you?
I mean, it's strictly his hubris, right? He's concerned with the little things. But this guy also, I mean, again, I don't know what the movie makers were thinking when they made this, but he's eating peanuts the whole time. You don't see him eating a single candy bar at any point. Maybe that's what he got into after the candy bars. He was like, I eat peanuts now. Menacingly eat peanuts in my limo.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, I like that character of McComb. He's played by Ron Silver. He's enough of a dick that it is just so believable. I loved his performance, and I think without him, if you had a cookie cutter villain, this movie would be a full wipe worse for me.
Well, what did you guys feel about the Sarah Fielding character that comes in and supposed to be his new partner, but then turns on him?
Yeah, so like unlike Silver, who was a fleshed out character and well performed, I felt like Fielding was like this throwaway. Like it was just basically something for Van Damme to play off of. And they used everything they could. It was like taunt her about her sexual history, taunt her about being a woman, the old cliche of like internal affairs being dirty. I felt that she was just a real shit character and did not need to be in the movie at any point.
No, that makes sense. That's why they threw in the Potomac. She gets out and they're drying off. She's sitting there in a t-shirt. Van Damme looked at the little tech, the dirty boy, and said, hey, could you put us into the Potomac?
But also film it in November so her nips are really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Walker returns to the TEC to find the future altered. McComb is now sole owner of the computer company and is a presidential frontrunner, while the TEC is being shut down due to budget cuts. Walker appeals to Matuzak, who has no knowledge of the alternate present. Matuzak sends Walker back to the past, sacrificing himself in the process.
Okay, time travel problem number probably 7 here. So McComb in the past kills his business partner, who was the brains, Jack Parker, the brains behind this computer chip that changes the future, becomes a $1 billion business, actually is part of the time travel technology. So when he killed Parker, how did this technology still get built? without the developer. It's like you go back in time and you kill Bill Gates. Microsoft doesn't become Microsoft.
That's the problem you had? How about every time Walker goes back to 1994, he can encounter another Walker, but every time he jumps to 2004, he's the only Walker. So that would mean is that in every time loop, he has to make the same exact decisions between 1994 and 2004 that place him in the same spot at the same time with the same personnel around him. So just imagine that there was an explosion and your wife died in it, and then another time your wife didn't die. But 10 years later, you're still going to be in the same place at the same time. It is virtually fucking impossible.
Okay, well, your explanation there just almost gave me a headache. So this is a bad time travel movie. If you ever want to see a great one, I would recommend Primer. I think it's from 2004. It is thought out to a level that after you watch the movie, you won't even get it. There's a 45-minute YouTube video that graphically demonstrates all of the timelines, and it is as good a time travel movie there is, but that is not this movie.
There's also a really good series on Netflix right now called Dark, and it's about, without giving the whole plot away, it's about time travel, but it's actually in German. If you guys watch it, make sure you turn off the English when they like speak over.
The dubbing?
The dubbing? Well, here we go with the
German
wine.
speak over.
The speak over. Turn off the English dubbing and listen to it in German with the subtitles. It is probably one of the most brilliant depictions of time travel I've seen. And it's on Netflix. It's great.
So back in 1994, Walker finds Fielding in the hospital, and after interrogation, she agrees to testify against McComb, though she is murdered in her room shortly thereafter. While at the hospital, Walker finds a record of a recent visit by his wife, Melissa, discovering that she was pregnant. Realizing that she would be killed later that night, he tracks her down and reveals himself to be from the future.
So again, we mentioned that we like in the Civil War scene that the guy dressed appropriately. Walker is walking around the streets in a futuristic police uniform with a police badge, a police gun. He walks into a hospital, shows his future cop badge to the nurse. I'm thinking, I don't work at a hospital, but Kerri, someone comes in with what looks like a future badge and they're dressing like they just left a Star Trek convention or Comic-Con. Are you going to let them walk around the hospital, maybe sneak behind the counter, check the blood vials?
Okay, even as a nurse or not a nurse, if a cop walks up to you with his badge, all you have to say is, show me your fucking warrant. You all saw that like crazy YouTube thing where that police officer like detains a nurse because she wouldn't let them take actually a blood sample. So even if you're in the hospital, you can't take things without a warrant. So one, the nurse should have done that. But second of all, he can't just walk into the lab without a badge. Like everywhere in the hospital is pretty much a locked unit. And then he finds all these blood samples and there's just one Jane Doe. Like that's not realistic. And every hospital I've worked at, like every other patient's a fucking Jane Doe, at least for a day until you figure out who they are. And then his wife's lab work just happens to be next to the one that he was looking at. And then just a piece of paper wrapped around it that says pregnant. That's not how that works at all.
But the blood samples, I don't get that. What was the whole point that he was trying to go get a blood sample for Fielding? What was he trying to prove?
They're trying to prove that she existed, I guess, because if he's trying to wipe her out of existence, he would come back into the future with this vial of blood that would therefore prove that she existed.
And Van Damme's whole point in going back there is to get Fielding to testify. But if the TEC doesn't know Fielding ever existed, what difference would her testimony make? So for all they know, she could just be a random person that Walker just found on the street. And there's so many other ways to do this. Why don't you just zip back to the actual killing and document it? Get a video camera, film it, and now you've got irrefutable proof of a killing.
Or he could have gone back 10 minutes before he left the first time, and instead of leaving her laying there to die, he could have brought her back into present time, and she wouldn't be laying in the fucking hospital that he'd have to go back to then prove that she existed.
This is the one I got to defend. This is his last trip back. Supposedly, they've taken apart the tracks, so he's stuck there. But maybe, that return button, he could have changed the dial and said, take me back. Instead of 10 years when they're taking apart the tracks, 9 years, but I'll let that go. But look at the balls on this guy. He's getting chased through the hospital. He just jumps through some random window. He doesn't even look to see what's down there. He just hauls off, jumps out, and luckily, he's only maybe 2 stories off the ground, but he survives.
He does do a nice ass plant on that awning, though. It's pretty impressive. So after all this, the younger Walker returns home and is attacked just as before, with the assailants revealed to be in McComb's employ. But he is unknowingly aided by his older self, who has been laying in wait. With the assailants defeated, the older McComb steps in and takes Melissa hostage, confronting the older Walker with the bomb. McComb reveals that even though he will die in the ensuing explosion, his younger self will survive and become president with Walker gone. Walker, however, reveals that he had previously lured the younger McComb to the house, who enters the room. After McComb wounds Melissa, Walker pushes the two McCombs together, and they merge into a liquefied mass before disappearing from existence forever. Walker escapes with Melissa before the bomb explodes and lays her down beside his unconscious younger self before returning to the future.
Okay, so Walker sends a message to young Senator McComb. We see it delivered by a secretary. It's at 3:30 in the afternoon. Senator McComb says, cancel my afternoon. What the fuck was he doing for 8 hours? He shows up at the house at midnight. What was he doing?
Everybody in this movie could take some hints from Kevin McAllister in Home Alone, and I detest Home Alone. But look, you've got all day to prep. There are so many ways you could play this out. There's so many ways you can play this out. And everything he does ends up putting everybody basically in almost essentially the same situation they were the first time around in 1994. This is the epitome of stupid.
He's putting it's in worse situation than the first time around. He knows his wife is pregnant this time. So what does he decide to do? Let's stick her on the roof. Let's put her more in harm's way. I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure she's having a miscarriage. Melissa is up on the roof. She's running around. He eventually slings her off of the gutter onto her stomach. She's shot in the shoulder. And then he carries her out in the blast of the shockwave. He lands on top of her on the lawn. That's not his son at the end of the movie.
I'm not a doctor, but I'm a nurse. And I'm going to say that's probably pretty taxing on a fetus.
Yes. Yes.
And when he found out that she was pregnant, like, why would he let her leave the mall and go back home where he knew that intruders were going to come in and fucking kill them? Like, why doesn't he just take her from the mall? And why doesn't he just explain to her, look, if you go back home, you're going to die. And I can't explain that to my past self. So I need you to make. Instead, he's like, just make sure he doesn't come downstairs at all. Like, what? No, don't go to the fucking house at all.
Yeah, and I get the reasoning. So there's two things that they're trying to do here. Walker can't see Walker, which is again stupid because he's a time cop.
But why can't Walker see Walker, but McComb can see McComb?
Walker's trying to follow the letter of the law and do as little interference as possible, but it's idiotic. And beyond that, Melissa doesn't have to be there. Like, he could just be waiting for them. Because what he's saying is that if they don't get you, if you're not there, then they're going to keep coming until they find you. But he could just kill them.
No, see, but here's the problem, okay? The entire movie, Walker's trying to follow the law, that he can't go back and interfere with the past because it's against the protocol and he wouldn't break the law. But Walker now realizes that his wife's murder was a time travel crime committed by future Senator McComb and his hooligans, which means future McComb has already altered the past and the future, so that nullifies the rule. And that's when Walker finally realizes that what he's doing isn't against the law, but he's actually trying to correct a past illegal use of time travel. So that's why he finally is okay with doing it. And he's realized at this point, tell the wife, don't go home and have sex. Take present Walker to a hotel. And then future Walker could set up the Kevin McAllister traps in the house, the swinging can of paint, the Christmas ornaments on the floor. He could have been laying in wait and just waxed them all.
The irony of all this is that the past is always going to be the past. So in the sense, at any present that you're in, if you're saying don't alter the past, well, the past is only what occurred before you were there. So once time travel is possible, you're saying don't do anything in the past, but you don't know if anything was altered, right? It just doesn't make any sense.
Every single thing that they've done would change the future. From the guy, the future Atwater falling through the hitting the car in the roof, that changed who would cross the street, who would walk. The whole future is different. I completely get that.
I love how this entire thing, we're just arguing the logistics of time travel like it's an actual thing.
Because there's nothing else to talk about. Like the movie, the action scenes, if they were more impressive, if the acting were better, if there were a better score, all the things that we loved about Conan, we would forget about the time travel entirely. But there's no substance to the movie to begin with.
But the three of us arguing about the logistics of time travel and everyone involved in the making of this movie didn't sit down and have a fucking conversation about how they were going to make it look like it worked.
Yeah, because it was more about just having fun with Van Damme kicking people.
Kicking people, splits, one-liners.
Yeah, I like there is one liner here that's great that they make fun of Van Damme. I was surprised you actually let it in the movie. Was old Senator McComb looks at Van Damme after he's just been like spinning around kicking people and he goes, "You're a fucking idiot. You've never learned that the only way you're going to make anything with that fancy kicking is Broadway." So I thought that was kind of funny.
So good. I think that's the only time I laughed in the whole movie.
So back in 2004, Walker finds the timeline has changed for the better. Matuzak and Fielding are alive and active in the TEC, whereas McComb no longer exists. Walker returns home to find Melissa alive and waiting for him with their young son.
So again, I have to start each block with a major time travel problem. So he returns into the present, and all the machines once again say Parker data link. Parker was killed that same day that we saw back in 1994. So he's dead. Later at night, McComb is also killed, or actually disappears. So for all intents and purposes, Parker McComb, the business, is out of business. How do all these machines still say Parker data link? How was that technology still created? So how the fuck will they get back to the future?
How the fuck is the house still standing? Like that happened before the intervention. The house gets blown up, right? I mean, they run out of there. So then he gets back to 2004. Fielding's still alive. She died back in 1994. So what the fuck is going on there? I want to give the movie the benefit of the doubt and say, what if this is a wink from the movie saying that more things happen that we saw, there's more travel back to the past, and that it was a progressive stacking of improvements for an ideal life for one time traveler, namely Walker.
Okay, the house is back together because his wife demonstrated she could put together a birdhouse.
Yes, that's what I was just going to say. She put that shit together like it was a fucking IKEA bookshelf. She rebuilt that whole house one at a time.
We're led to believe this is a happy ending. Walker comes home, he gets in his car, he goes to the house, his family's there. Let's keep in mind, future Walker is returning to 2004. He has no memory of the previous 10 years. He's showing up to a 10-year-old son who he doesn't know, who doesn't know him. He has no memories. He's got 10 years of amnesia. How are you able to rebuild that? This is almost a tortured, fucked up finish. He's going to have to pretend that he remembers. So the son will be like, "Dad, do you remember the baseball game?" He'll be like, yeah.
Do you remember that time the house blew up?
Yeah.
Remember that time I died inside my mom's tummy?
Yeah, exactly.
But again, you guys have asked the question several times, and I've been waiting patiently to rebut. And the question is, why don't you go back and stop Dr. Hans Kleindast from inventing time travel? And that's like saying, why don't you go back and stop the atomic bomb from being invented? It will be invented. So all science builds upon other science. All developments build upon other developments. And so killing one man or stopping one project, it won't forever end anything. I think T2 showed that. Science is built upon science. The Iranians are already doing it in this movie. They're already doing time travel or attempting it. So it's just a matter of time before somebody else would invent it anyway, because the building blocks are there.
Okay, here's the way you do it. They can obviously sense when the ripples when someone else is using time travel. So you go back to when Dr. Kleindast is developing it with instructions for the government. You kill the doctor and you leave instructions that build the machine that can sense time travel. You haven't necessarily done away with it. The US government still has time travel. You're just taking it away, the ability for the professor to share it with the world. Then every time you sense time travel, go back, kill him again. Kill him again. You should be able to do it in perpetuity.
There's someone out there right now listening who's like, how the fuck did these guys love Conan? And they're ripping the shit out of Timecop. And it's because they dared. It's because they dared to bring science into it, to explain how matter can't occupy the same space, to talk about how the time travel works. And as soon as you do that, you're opening yourself up to it. If they had left all that stuff obfuscated, we could have enjoyed this movie like normal human beings.
Speaking of matter on matter, how fucking disappointing was it when the two McCombs collide into this jelly, bloody blob and disappear into the floor? Like, get the fuck out of here. This is the worst movie.
Do you know earlier in the movie when they're doing the tour around the facility, the cop, whoever's in charge of it, says, well, it's never happened before, but we just know it can't happen. Everything that Walker's doing here is predicated on the idea that it would be a terminal incident that if matter occupied the same space. What if it acted like putting two positive magnets together? And when he threw the McCombs together, they actually just kind of pushed each other apart? Like they couldn't occupy the same space, but it didn't mean they were going to die?
I was really hoping you'd say they formed a mega McComb. He was just like twice as big.
I just love the visual of them like physically not being able to occupy the same space like magnets.
Yeah, they kind of repel each other and then they both look at Walker and shoot him in the head.
So somebody on Reddit actually went and was like trying to explain what would happen in the scenario and why it went the way it did. And the explanation, which still doesn't make sense to me, is essentially that even the slightest impact between the two of them would cause a loop of damage between the tissue in their two bodies. So basically, as one hit the other, there's a slight abrasion, but you multiply that through time infinity, and it becomes like the old one is wounded by the slight bump. I'm sorry, so then the newer one is wounded by the slight bump, which then causes the old one, and it becomes a loop, and then therefore they liquefy. But it should have been messier.
And that was Gene Lyons with his Minute of Science.
Shat the facts.
Shat on science.
All right, you fuckers. All right, so time to vote on this turd. We're doing the Shat meter. If you're not familiar with the Shat meter, this is how we rate movies on Shat the Movies. A 0 score is a perfect movie. It is a clean transition from 1994 to 1929 in your most dapper suit. A 5 wiper is the worst movie you've ever seen. It is hot McComb on McComb blobby action. So
that's like the Volcom twins hitting the wall.
Oh, that's a good one. Fuck, Big D. I should have asked you ahead of time. So, Big D, since you're feeling so vocal, why don't you tell me what you thought of this movie?
Okay, so I know I've been tearing apart the science, but I got to be honest. Out of all the Jean Claude solo movies, it's probably his best and interesting performance. We never see Jean Claude broken, bitter, as we do in this movie. Usually he's kind of the flawless hero. He's tormented by the fact that the only person he loved is dead and he can't do anything about it. He showed a depth that I think was 100 times better than anything else in his filmography. But that doesn't take away the fact that the time travel aspect, even though it was adequately executed, even though if we don't think about the car hitting the wall and the magnet, it still looked okay, but it made no logical sense. There was no time travel rules or mechanic that they seemed to follow or even think up. So I got to say, I'm left in the end presented with what I think their goal was to have a movie with Jean Claude running around, shirtless, sweaty, making sweet, passionate love, teaching us about sex, and kicking people in the face. And even though it's unthought out and unoriginal, it's not unwatchable. I would watch this again compared to some of the other movies we've done recently. I would watch this twice before Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I'm going to give it a 3.5 wipe.
How dare you? When I saw the scores that you guys posted, I went back and I looked at the ranking, and you gave Blade Runner a 4. This is a better movie than Blade Runner?
Okay, you want to know why? Because I don't have to hear whoa, 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 like that sound in the background. Blade Runner, I will put on if I need to go for a nap. That thing put me to sleep twice.
All right, Kerri Gross, I think it's time that you told us what you think of Timecop.
Well, I'd actually like you to give your score so that I can explain why I gave my score. Because I'm on a vendetta here. This is how I ended up on this podcast, is that I threatened Gene that I was going to start my own podcast and only talk about Blade Runner being the greatest movie of all time because of the horrible scores that you guys gave it. And then when I Googled this, people are comparing this to Blade Runner. So I'm making it my personal vendetta to give this movie a better score than Blade Runner.
Oh, hold on. What does it tell you when people online are comparing this to Blade Runner?
I think only in the sense of the genre of like sci-fi, science fiction. In all reality, I don't see any comparison.
That's you. There's obviously a big community of us out there.
Of us. I was the one that told you about it. Okay, so this is quite literally the worst movie I've ever seen in my fucking life. And I was so annoyed and disappointed about the time that I wasted watching this god-awful crap that I can't even muster up the energy to think of a worse movie than this. I would like to give it a 6 wipe, but I'm stuck with a 5. And fuck you all for giving this a better score than Blade Runner. It's blasphemous.
Your language is just inappropriate. I told you no wine before this podcast, and I can see now an empty glass sitting in front of you.
But I only had 1 glass of wine and a Tecate so that I could, compose myself, pronounce words correctly. But I will forever fight for Blade Runner being the best movie of all time.
All right, so that's a 5 wipes from Kerri Gross. Big D, what did you have?
3.5.
All right, so it's 3.5 from Big D. I guess it comes down to me. It's a lot of pressure here.
Give it a fucking 5.
After a strong start, the movie just fell apart, right? So with each successive time jump, I think it got more convoluted, more nonsensical. And I had to really dig back and go, what is it that makes sense about this movie? And it's just preposterous that you take a guy whose chief characteristic is good kicking and a lot of charisma, and you put him in a movie about time travel. It just doesn't make sense. So I love Bloodsport. And in Bloodsport, Van Damme had a simple storyline. There was inventive action. There were interesting characters. And Timecop had a bigger budget, but it lacked all those things. All the things that made Bloodsport great. All the things that make Van Damme great. And so I could forgive those plot holes. I could forgive the wonky physics if the action scenes were amazing. But they were boring and they were repetitive. And that being said, like you said, Big D, Van Damme has this undeniable charm. He has this magnetism on screen where you're just like, he's adorable. And like the way he delivers lines, there's something neat about it. I don't know what the hell it is. But after listening to both of you, I do feel like I might have been a little optimistic on my wipe score initially. And I think I had to dial it down just a smidge. So I think that I would go with a 4 wiper on this. Woo! So it's not the worst movie I've ever seen. It's certainly still better than Highlander. I think it's better than Willow. But it is a weak movie. And again, I'm just like I did with Casino with Scorsese films. I'm comparing this against other Van Damme movies, and this is no Bloodsport.
So here's my problem, I think, with Van Damme. He's a one-trick pony. He's kicking people in the head, roundhouse kick. After a while, the first couple kicks, you're like, wow, it's like Cirque du Soleil. Cirque du Soleil is great because you get to see all the different acts doing different things. But if you only had the girl on the ribbon, the falls down, she tumbles, she climbs up and down the ribbon. After the second time, you're like, oh, fuck, here's that ribbon thing again. Arnold punches snakes. He hacks people with swords. He's all over the place. Van Damme, charismatic, but the kick gets old real quick.
I think you summed it up perfectly, Big D. So those scores together, a 4, a 3.5, and a 5, bring us to an average score of 4.16 repeating for Timecop. Big D, where does that put this in the Shadow of the Movies rankings?
Where does it put this in comparison to Blade Runner, more importantly?
Enough with Blade Runner. Jesus. Hold on, here we go. Rankings. Okay, you guys are fucking bullshit. I can tell Kerri went and did the numbers. This is bullshit. Was that half score? Was this planned?
No.
No, literally, I was going to give it a 5 no matter what. If I could have given it a 6 to give it a worse score, I would have, but I saw you're both. And then my justification might have convinced Jean that it really is half a score shittier than he thought.
Okay, anyway. This is movie number 62 that we're doing, and it is now ranked number 55. It is worse than Blade Runner, and it is better than Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Perfect.
That's about right.
Yeah, but convenient, huh? This is right behind Blade Runner?
I mean, you're looking at my notes right here, Big D. You know that I had a 3.5. What I did was I looked at your score of a 3.5, and it was mostly praise. And I thought, okay, well, if that's his opinion at a 3.5, I'm certainly not that optimistic about this film. I don't have that much of an affinity for it. And so I dialed it down to a 4.
And then my hatred for it also convinced him. And let's be real, Jean Claude Van Damme compared to Harrison Ford's character, I mean, this movie was complete shit.
Wow, you did a great job there defending Blade Runner. Fantastic. Very eloquent.
This movie was complete shit. Therefore, Blade Runner is the best movie of all time.
All right. So that closes it out for Timecop. Let's hope we never have to watch this movie again, except for Big D, who wants to watch it again. And Raj, if you're listening out there, consider yourself lucky. I could see you squirming in your seat watching this, and not because of VR boners. Coming up, we have our next movie, which was actually spawned by Big D's brainchild of a contest. Big D, you want to tell us about it?
Yes, the contest for iTunes reviews was a success beyond my wildest dreams. We got some 50 suggestions. They ranged from Fargo, You've Got Mail, Fear, Quigley Down Under, Bronx Tale, Pump Up the Volume, The Mouth of Madness, Braveheart, Crocodile Dundee, Boondock Saints, Goodfellas, Last Boy Scout, Ace Ventura, Tremors, Dirty Dancing, The Incredible Mr. Limpet, which I'm not even sure if that's 80s or 90s, Legend of Billie Jean, Event Horizon, Predator, Dumb and Dumber. And then somebody, I got to realize I got to shut up sometimes, somebody suggested The Prince of Tides. So if you want to hear what we're doing, we're going to play the trailer at the end. But the winner that we selected at random is a pretty good movie, and I think everybody will be happy. I'm excited to do it. I think Raj will be back for that. So thank you for everyone who submitted a review. It helps us out. We do have a new voicemail from a longtime listener, Coach Marcus, who used to play for the Philadelphia Eagles, if I'm correct.
That's right. He is an Eagles alum.
And here is his voicemail. Again, if you want to leave a voicemail, give us a call, 914-719-SHAT. And if it's good, we'll play it on the air. So take it away, Coach Marcus.
Hey, what's going on, fellas? This is Coach Marcus calling. You guys are reviewing one of my favorite movies, Conan the Barbarian. Just like my Philadelphia Eagles have been the underdog, and they came back to win the Super Bowl. Conan was an underdog. Thulsa Doom killed his parents, put him on a tree of woe, was trying to crucify him and all of that. But did he quit? Nope. Came back, still got his Riddle of Steel, got together, got him a new squad, and went and put that foot all up in Thulsa Doom's ass. That's what I'm talking about, Conan the Barbarian. Still listen to that music when I work out in the gym. It's all good. Love you guys. Appreciate the shout out, man, and I'm still listening. Peace.
I wish I'd heard Coach Marcus 2 years ago before reading all of his tweets, and I could hear the tweets in his voice. That was amazing, Coach Marcus. Thank you so much.
I love Coach Marcus. I spent a few weeks in Philly, and it was like the most fun I've ever had. And I was actually there the week that Villanova won like this championship, and they like shut schools down. They shut businesses down, and the entire city of Philadelphia was like in the city center, parades, marching, lighting shit on fire.
Yeah.
And here I am. I'm like, what's college basketball? I don't know.
Greasing up the light poles with Crisco. Fucking Philly style.
Once again, Coach Marcus, thanks so much. As Big D mentioned, the voicemail line is 914-719-SHAT. If you have a voicemail for us, please leave it there, and we will consider playing it on the podcast, particularly if it's complimentary to our Timecop. All right, that concludes this week's episode of Shat the Movies. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat the Movies. On Facebook, search for Shat the Movies Podcasts. The website is shatthemovies.com, and you can email us at hosts@shatthemovies.com if you have any suggestions for movie themes or just want to give us a hello. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by iTunes, please leave a review. That helps the podcast grow. Also, check out our sister podcast, Shat on TV, where we review TV series such as Westworld, Taboo, and American Gods. You can find all that information on our website, shatontv.com. On behalf of my co-hosts, Big D, Dick Ebert, and Kerri Gross, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us next week for our surprise contest winner. Here's the trailer.
I came back home to raise crops and, God willing, a family.
So you want me to marry you then?
Well, that's a bit sudden, but all right.
Is that what you'd call a proposal?
I love you. Always have. I want to marry you.
His dreams were of peace and the woman he loved.
I want a home and shelter. It's all for nothing if you don't have freedom.
But his destiny would be written in a battle for honor.
As Lord of these lands, I will bless this marriage by taking the bride on the first night of her union.
Go back to England and tell them there that Scotland's daughters and her sons are yours no more.
Rallies new volunteers in every Scottish town.
I knight thee, Sir William Wallace, Guardian and High Protector of Scotland.
Where are you going? I'm going to pick a fight.
Well, we didn't get dressed up for nothing.
He waits for you at York, if you are man enough to come and face him.
We cannot defeat this army.
We can! And we will!
If we win, we'll have what none of us have
we've ever had before. A country of our own. I want to stay here with you.
And I with you.
Would you be willing, for one chance, just one chance, to tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Mel Gibson